This is July. It's the month of Sabbath. As part of the Sabbath, we do a few different things. We're suspending our midweek services and our connect groups in the month of July. We will resume those in August. The first Wednesday in August will be our promotion Wednesday, and we're working on stuff for that, where we promote the students to their next grade and their next class level on Wednesday nights, and some will be going from nursery into kids church, and some will be going from kids church into youth, and some will be going from 65 to 66 years old, and congratulations. That's my parents' age. It's not old. I'm not calling you old. I'll do that in just a few minutes. But we're going to recognize that on the first Wednesday of August. But just to review last week, I started a message about Sabbath, and I want to kind of hit the highlights. We saw that what's missing really does matter. What's missing matters. And we have all these technological advances that are supposed to make our life easy, but we've created a society that is busier than any moment in history. It didn't give us more free time that we would utilize for rest. It gave us more free time for us to fill with things that make us or keep us busy. We saw how God gave Sabbath to humanity by example in creation. Through the first 6 days he worked, and on the seventh day he rested. And this example was for them to see. And hundreds of years later, they didn't treat it that way. Egyptian culture and society had changed the way the Hebrews lived life, and they were slaves 7 days a week. And I compared that to what's happening to us now, how it's not quite so obvious, but it's the same basic principle. As an American church, we are held captive by we're not held captive by a more powerful entity. We're held captive by our own desires and our own habits, and we are slaves to a society that we have created ourselves. And God gave the Hebrews the Ten Commandments, and in doing so, he called the Hebrews to a life of Sabbath, reminding them that he created it. So that was last week. This week, before I get into it, I wanted to tell you about this older couple. I told you it was coming. There was an older couple. They were both in their 80s, and they were forgetting things. They were just having difficulty remembering things, and they both realized that they had to do something about it, so they went to the doctor. And the doctor, they saw this family doctor together, and he asked them questions. He gave them a good physical workover, and he sat them both down and said, physically you look okay. You're for your age, all your levels are okay. Your blood pressure is good. Everything seems to be okay. But, that's something that happens when you get older. You tend to forget things. So what I want you to do is I want you to write something down when you think of it, so that later on you'll be able to reference it and you'll know what's going on. Okay, I guess that's what we'll do. So that very night, they're at home. They're sitting there watching the evening news, and the husband gets up to go into the kitchen, and the wife looks up and says, "Honey, are you going to the kitchen?" "Yeah." "While you're in there, will you get me a bowl of ice cream?" And he said, "Sure." She said, "I think you need to write it down." And he said, "No, you want a bowl of ice cream? I got it." "Okay." And he turns to go in the kitchen. She's like, wait, baby. "Yeah, honey? Can you put strawberries in it?" "Oh, yeah, I'll put strawberries in it." You probably need to write that part down." "No, I don't need to write it down. You want ice cream with strawberries? I got it." Okay. "Baby, one more thing." "Yes, honey." "Will you put whipped cream on it too?" "Yes, I'll write it down." "I'm not writing it down. You want strawberries and whipped cream on top of ice cream. I'm going to bring you ice cream with strawberries and whipped cream." And she's, "Okay, all right." He goes in the kitchen, and she hears him kind of banging around and hears some things. And 20 minutes later, he comes back into the living room, and he hands her a plate with bacon and eggs on it. And she looked at him and said, "I knew you should have written it down. You forgot my toast." I'll be the first to admit, I do not have as good a memory as I used to. My calendars are all synced together. My phone, my iPad, my laptop, I have Google Calendar and an Apple Calendar, and they are all synced together with multiple sub-calendars within them because I will forget things. It's a bad thing for me. There's been so many times, especially on Sundays, when people will come and talk to me and ask me something or tell me something, and if it's on Sunday, I love you. I promise I love you, and I mean it when I tell you I'll remember it that time. But I'll probably either bring you bacon and eggs and no toast, or I may not even remember that you asked me something at all. And I apologize. I'm just not as good a memory as it was. And you know, it's not just me. Lindsay and I are probably going to be that couple in our 80s. She had, she was always great. She remembered people's phone numbers and remembered their birthdays. And the birthdays are still locked in there pretty good. But she has what she calls mommy brain. And for all the mothers in the room, you understand. Sometimes when it just gets to a certain point with kids, there's things that you just blank out. And that, you know, something that when she's talking to the kids, she'll say something incorrect, and the kids will look at her funny, and she's like, do what I mean. You know what I'm saying. Just do it. And it was the mommy brain. But it's said that our memory and our vision are often least reliable when it comes to the things that we're closest to and the things we care about the most. You know, maybe when it comes to Sabbath, it's not ill intent. Maybe we don't actually are worried that we're intentionally neglecting Sabbath. We just have a society-wide case of absent-mindedness. With each generation, we forget a little bit more about Sabbath and the promises of God. Maybe that's why the commandment is the only one that begins with the word remember. Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. It's easy to forget the intent of Sabbath. But see, Sabbath actually frees you from burdens. It's not a burden. Sometimes people will think, well, the commandments are burdens. It's all these thou shalt nots. It's all these things that I'm not supposed to do. Remembering the Sabbath frees you from the burden of work. Verse 9, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Sabbath frees everyone from work. It relieves the struggle from the servants, from the animals. It was designed that way that nobody had to work. Nobody was supposed to. It was the rest was supposed to take place there. But even though it's clearly laid out, over time, Sabbath is easy to forget. And it happened. Jesus recognized this absent-mindedness, and he made it part of his mission to restore Sabbath to its original intent. We're going to look in the book of Luke chapter 4, beginning verse 16. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." I am blessed to have been in a synagogue in Nazareth. They're not certain that it was the one that Jesus proclaimed those words, but it is a first century synagogue that they have unearthed in Nazareth. And I was there with a group of people, and the director of our group stood up and read from Isaiah that very passage that Jesus spoke on that day. And he quotes from Isaiah, proclaiming it the year of the Lord's favor. Now, the original text in Isaiah goes on a little bit more. In Isaiah 61, it goes on to say in the next verse, this is the day of the vengeance of our God. And Jesus leaves that verse out in order to emphasize that they're in the year of the Lord's favor. His day of vengeance will come. It will come at the end of time. But when he said that, he said, this is the year of the favor of the Lord. He closed the scroll, sat down, and then proclaimed, this scripture is now fulfilled in your ears. So this is referencing what is called the Sabbath of Sabbaths. On a normal Sabbath routine, you would have one day a week the Hebrew people would stop working. You would have work 6 days, rest 1. Work 6 days, rest 1. And then every 7th year, they would have a Sabbath year when the land was allowed to rest from growing crops. And they would prepare for this by setting aside a little bit extra each time so that when the 7th year came, they didn't go without. They had 7 years extra, 1 year extra worth of grain so that they could make it through the Sabbath year. The land would regain nutrients in that year. An entire season of harvest would go through, and the ground would be even more fertile so that on the next year, when they began their harvest once more, they would produce more crops because the ground was able to rest as well as the people. So then every 7 cycles of 7 years, what's 7 times 7? 49 years. On the next year, it would follow a year of Sabbath, but this year of Sabbath is different than the one that happened every 7 years. This one, the people had to prepare for 2 years of no harvesting, because on the 49th year, they didn't harvest, and then on the 50th year, it was called the year of Jubilee. And on the year of Jubilee, it was a bit different. At the year of Jubilee, all debts were canceled. In the year of Jubilee, all slaves were set free. In the year of Jubilee, all property would go back to its original owner. During Jubilee, your mistakes are forgiven and what it was lost is restored. If you hit a hard time, maybe you had to sell your family land that had been in your family for years and generations and generations. And what happens, maybe there was famine, maybe you didn't prepare correctly for one of the Sabbath 7th years, and about halfway through that year, you had to sell part of your land to buy somebody else's grain so that you could support your family until you could get to the next year. Or whatever it was, maybe you had to sell yourself into slavery to pay off a debt, but on the year of Jubilee, all of that went back to where it was originally supposed to be. The Jubilee year came around on average once a generation. It was once every 50 years. So some people, it wasn't uncommon for people to experience 2 Jubilees. However, the lifespan at the time, you wouldn't usually experience 3. So every 50th year, everything was restored back to where it was supposed to be. It was a chance to start over. It was a chance for a clean slate with half a century ahead of you. You got your family's land back. You got your own freedom back. You got everything that was supposed to be yours that you haven't had for however long it was. And here's the thing, because it was 50 years, maybe your father 30 years ago had to sell the land, and you've never known what it's like to be able to have your own land in that time period. And now that the year of Jubilee has come, you all of a sudden have everything that was your father's mistake, and his debt now has been granted back to you, and you're able to start over from scratch again. Jesus is speaking that the ultimate Sabbath year is fulfilled in him. You see, that's the Sabbath year was God's way of restoring everything back to the people of that time. But in Jesus' time, in now, in our time, in the year of the favor of the Lord, our Sabbath is fulfilled through him and with him. And I want us to be sure about Sabbath. If you observe Sabbath only because it's one of the 10 Commandments, then that's living strictly by the law. The law alone will not save you. Jesus will. He is the fulfillment of the law. And he even claims his authority over the Sabbath in Matthew 12 and verse 8. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. He let them know. And I'll get into the story here in just a few minutes, but he let the Pharisees know, why are you telling me? I'm Lord of the Sabbath. And there was something exciting about the Sabbath day, and it really kind of excited Jesus too, because people were primed. They were ready for a blessing. And I want to take you to a story where Jesus leveraged his power for the benefit of someone in need. Here we're in Luke chapter 13, beginning in verse 10. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and behold, there was a woman who had a disabling spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not fully straighten herself. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said to her, "Woman, you are freed from your disability." And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and she glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to the people, "There are 6 days in which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day." Then the Lord answered him, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to water it? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on Sabbath day?" And he said these things. All his adversaries were put to shame, and all the people rejoiced at all the glorious things that were done by him. Jesus redirected their attention to what really mattered. Should an ox or a donkey get more respect than a woman who has struggled for 18 years? No. Sabbath wasn't just for animals. Sabbath was for the people. Sabbath was to set them free. Again, right back to the text where they were given in Exodus 20, 10, and 11. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Sabbath is a holy day. It is the Lord's day. And on this day, Jesus meets with his people. It's a day of blessing, not a day of legalistic curses. It's a day of blessing. All throughout the Gospels, Jesus restores Sabbath to what it was originally designed to be. There's a number of times that Jesus did something specific on a Sabbath day. In Mark chapter 1 and in Luke chapter 4, it tells the story of him casting out demons on the Sabbath. In Luke 14, he heals a man of dropsy on the Sabbath. In John chapter 9, he heals a blind man on the Sabbath. In Mark chapter 2, he feeds the hungry on the Sabbath. In Matthew chapter 12, he puts the Pharisees in their place because they're complaining about what happened. The disciples were walking and they were breaking off grain, and they were, because they were harvesting and they were eating, the Pharisees had a problem with this, and they came to Jesus and they were complaining to him about it. And it's in this passage that Jesus proclaims that he is Lord of the Sabbath. Again, verse 8, "For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." He's telling the Pharisees here, guys, you're getting this all wrong. And then what does he do? Immediately after he puts the Pharisees in their place, because the disciples, all they were doing was they were breaking that off. They were eating it. Oh, we got you. Ha ha. I'm Lord of Sabbath. And then he's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to immediately show you how I'm Lord of Sabbath. Not only is it okay for my disciples to go ahead and break some grain and eat it, but I'm going to take you and I'm going to show you what else. And what does he do? He goes, and that very next thing, he walks into the synagogue and he heals a man with a withered hand, showing that he is Lord of the Sabbath. You complain about my disciples doing that? I'll show you what I can do on my day. Sabbath is about healing and restoration for those who are in the right place at the right time for the blessing. So if the true intent of Sabbath is rest, then what we have to do is determine what true rest really is. Because the meaning would be subject to the individual. Well, that doesn't make sense, Pastor. Rest is rest. Kind of. And the Bible's clear. But true rest in the Lord changes depending on the person's problem. You see, for me, running a marathon wouldn't be rest. For me, running a marathon would definitely be work. But for my mother, who hasn't walked in years, Sabbath for her would be to get up and run as far as she could. A woman who spends 23 hours a day in bed. Physically, she's only able to get up in her chair for an hour at a time right now. She's getting better, but even then, without the Lord providing her complete healing, until He takes her home, she wouldn't walk again. So what does Sabbath look like for her? Sabbath for my mom would be getting up and doing a cartwheel like she used to do when she was a little girl. What does rest look like for you? For the hungry, rest looks like a big old plate of food. Rest looks like not having to carry the burden of hunger. For the blind, rest is having sight. The meaning of rest for a single mom might be financial security. The meaning of rest for the lonely is a relationship or a companionship. The meaning of rest is the laying down of your struggles and your burdens. Will you stand? Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, Jesus said this. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." What kind of rest do you need this morning? What does rest look like for you? Is rest enough strength in your body that you're laying down the burden of pain? Well, you're not supposed to go and do all of that on the Sabbath. You're supposed to sit on your backside and listen for God. Well, how about you lay down the burden of the physical pain that you're in, and your rest looks like getting up and running around the block? Maybe your rest is being able to go shopping and not have to worry that when you swipe your card, if it's going to come back insufficient funds. Maybe rest for you is knowing that you can get in your car and drive somewhere and have enough gas to still get to work tomorrow because you lay down the burden of financial difficulty. Maybe it's the rest for you is found in the loving embrace of a friend or a family member because you've laid down the burden that you've carried, the bitterness, the hurt, the pain. And the rest is found in casting your cares. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. As I began to pray this morning, again, this altar is open. I told you there'd be another opportunity for prayer. And if you need, we'll pray now too.